Controversial part of this conference event is about to begin. We will have Festivus right now. Before we start off with the festivities, people wanted me to say a few things about what it is about. So this was the original Festivus call. Can you hear me if I talk like this? Festivus call that we put up. And as you know, we were trying to get people to talk about the things that bother them. And we also wanted the talks to be broad, thoughtful, yet funny critiques, and hopefully rock the boat. And then I foolishly signed up for this with the assumption, of course, that with something like this, planning people are going to be game, and tons of people will send me requests to get a slot, and all I need to do is just do a random permutation and take 5 or 6 people. Little did I know that that was not going to happen. So I have a problem with you people. So the problem, of course, is that most of you who actually heard about Festivus are very interested in the idea, but as long as somebody else stands up and does it here. It seems to me that we are complacent employers. Okay. Having said that, there is, in fact, I was able to get a bunch of brave, plaintive souls to actually agree to stand up and talk about the things that are bothering them. And so the way the schedule is going to happen is there's going to be a 5-minute talk plus 5 minutes audience questions by 6 different people. So it's 30 minutes for the people standing here to talk and 30 minutes for the audience to ask questions. And then there's a closing buffer and discussion for 10 minutes. Me being a planning guy who has no clue of execution, I wanted somebody who's serious enough to take the execution stuff seriously. So I got Sam Steele to keep the time. Sam, you actually don't have to be that tough with me. For the other guys, that was part of the deal. I might have forgotten to tell you. So Sam is going to keep the time and make sure that things run on time. Now, before I show you the 6 unfortunate brave souls who actually agreed to do this, I just want to say a little point about how this whole thing evolved. This is extremely secretive. The 6 people, most of them didn't know who else was talking, and even when they came to know who else was talking, they still don't know what they are talking about. And for my part, I know approximately what they're talking about, but they won't tell me the exact details. As I was coming in, Martha Pollack, who is one of the people you'll see, essentially, ran from me saying, "Oh, I have to get something and I can't tell you." So I'm just as lost about this as you guys are. Having said that, in fact, I'm told that some Al-Qaeda cells might be more transparent than the secrecy surrounding this event. Having said that, this is the schedule. Dan Brown, Craig Knobloch, David Smith, Amadeus Esther, Adil Howe, and Martha Pollack would be talking about what is bugging them. A couple of caveats and exhortations before I turn over the mics to them. This is not a spectator sport. So line up at the shiny 2 microphones, the aluminum pole microphones, and don't jostle too much, but ask questions after people say their thing. And questioning doesn't mean non-believing. Just because these people are asking tough questions about the field doesn't mean they don't actually believe in planning. Many of these people you'll see are so old and they've been talking in planning for such a long time that it's too hard for them to get a second career. So they really believe in planning. And then I also want to say thanks to the participants and organizers for taking the chance with this event, especially the organizers. And I just hope they remember how heartfelt my thanks are when they're trying to run after me to lynch me after this whole thing blows up on our face in a minute. And then one special note, the feats of strength and the wrestling of the heads of the household, for those of you Seinfeld fans, are part of the thing, except after this is over, Susan Khanna and Karen will be there to take down anybody who wants to do that. This is my very last slide. So Bernard Shaw says that all change is based on unreasonable men and women. Dylan Thomas says old people should burn and rave at the end of the day, right? So we now present you a baby of unreasonable and old men and women. Let the Festivus begin. The first, of course, is Dan Well, and as I said, Sam Steele is going to make sure that they follow the rules.
Okay, everybody. This is becoming a tradition with the ceremony to get my courage up. I've been instructed a few sips of this potion should help. Okay, so titling this The Verdict, and it really comes out of a nightmare that I have. Every now and then I wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. And what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about what is it that we're doing? What is this planning stuff? And all around my bed, these awful creatures gather, and I find it impossible to go back to sleep. I wake up in a sweat, and it's awful. And really the way it turns out is I think about my whole life. I feel like the whole field is on trial. And all around there's various arguments about whether or not it's reasonable to be doing what we're doing. So it starts out with the counsel for the defense arguing that, in fact, we've made huge progress. And as I think about this, it makes so much sense. You know, the field seems to be really, really strong. If you look at the planning competition, the speed of our planners has increased enormously. And we're not just doing strips planning anymore. We're handling derivative actions and concurrency and uncertainty and all sorts of cool things. And the ICAPS papers I review are very, very strong. If you look at AAAI and ICAPS, 10%, only 10% of the papers there are on planning, so clearly the field is extremely healthy. But I can't get back to sleep. I still have these nagging doubts. And one of the things is, as I just look at it, and I know it's different in Europe perhaps, but in the United States, just look at the university jobs anyway, and there just aren't that many universities that are hiring people in planning. And this seems really kind of troubling. If somebody's doing statistical relational learning or applications of ubiquitous computing or other kinds of data mining, it seems really easy to get jobs. But what about in planning? This seems highly problematic to me. And that's where things start going downhill. The prosecutor gets up there and he says, "Well, where are the applications? What, you guys are doing stuff that doesn't really matter." And I said, "But no, it's not for scripts anymore." And after coming here, I can see even more. There's lots of applications. And I talk about the work that's been done on manufacturability analysis, or robotic path planning, or some of the neat work managing the power grid, or some of the work to choose airborne observations from this plane that's flying around with a huge telescope. And I think these are great applications, and they're very inspirational. The only problem is they actually don't look anything like planning as the field seems to define it. So the real question is to off-the-shelf planning methods. Suppose you want to build Sophie's Choice, you want to come up with something that's going to plan these observations from this airplane. Can you just take a PDDL planner? No, of course not. You can't. The whole problem is very, very different from the way we've abstracted it. Now, there's a few exceptions, so of course I won't talk about them. But I just want to say, if most of the applications don't look like our abstraction, then why the heck do we keep going on building them? Why are there more and more papers talking about topics X, Y, and Z that maybe I've published on before, but I'm not gonna try to point names now. You guys know who you are. Okay, so the jury's still out. I think what we really need to do is choose the right problems going forward, and we need to aim towards real applications. So I'd much rather see some sort of paper that starts out by saying, here's some real problem, I can't solve it yet, but I really want to solve it. And in a convincing way, not in one of those sort of, I hope the reviewers will buy it way. I don't want to see papers that start out by saying, Joe Jones built a planner which did X, and now I've got one that works 10 times as fast, or one that removes assumption X, Y, or Z. So we just point out that some of the other fields of AI have this problem too, is where the theorists don't talk the applications of things. Just to pick one example that I heard from a colleague, talking to people in machine learning, Colt was going strong, and eventually one year they decided to co-locate with a machine learning conference, and some of the theorists came up and said, why are you building those scruffy decision trees and doing all that kind of stuff? We've got this great theory of boosting, and and it's much more cleaner and elegant than what you guys have come up with. And then finally, I said, well, okay, why don't you guys apply it to the real data and see? And when they did, it didn't work, which of course caused them to go back and figure out why not. And then they came up with something which really does work, and some great work came out of it. So I think we need to make sure we don't fall into the same trap, and we need to apply to real data. And I think we need to do that, not just for ourselves, but also because we need the respect of these other fields to make sure our students get jobs and nothing else. Okay, I'm out of time. No questions? Wait.
I had 3 brief comments. First, I really wanted to take exception to Rao's comment about these people being older than reasonable, particularly given that I'm older than most of them. Second, Dan, I really wish there was a very important application area that you left out of your list, and that is building stacks of children's blocks. The third, I'm recalling some papers that I have seen recently by people who do logic programming talking about how one of their applications is AI planning.
Does he respond? No.
You can respond.
What are the rules?
That's true, Dana. You are older than many of us. And more unreasonable as well.
Yeah, so I'm really glad you mentioned the connection to machine learning, because I have many of the same complaints about that community as that you have about the planning community. One of the frustrating things, though, about machine learning is that they do all sorts of applications, like text learning and stuff. They've had lots of money to be made, and they're all really, really boring, and I don't think they tell us much about intelligence. So I think we have to be careful to just go off and do planning that has real applications. There can be very profitable, important applications that don't push the field very far. So I think we need to be looking both for things that have real applicability, but also that challenge our technology. Now, the good thing about the machine learning community is there's been a couple of interesting essays people wrote, mostly 10 years ago, and no one pays attention to them, but they're good essays. One was by Tom Dietrich on what he called exploratory research papers. He challenged the field. He said, look, we need more papers not on new methods, but on new problems. And he outlined what a good paper on exploratory research was. And it's not just a statement of a new problem, but it also outlines what the challenges are, why existing techniques can't handle it, and really outlines a whole research program. The other is an essay on what constitutes a good applications paper by Provost and Kohavi. And you might think that applications papers are very different from exploratory research papers. They actually should be pretty similar. A good application paper doesn't just show some new application. It shows that here's an application, and here are the bottlenecks we get. Here's why our existing technology was not sufficient. And again, it points to new problems. So I think we need to see more of that here. And so I think I agree with you. Sure.
So I 100% agree with what you're saying too. And I can't claim to have all of the problems with the field in my show, so that's why there's other people coming after me, I guess. No, I 100% agree. I guess I just think that our field is maybe skewed a little bit more in one direction. But I think the other problems are important too.
Other question?
I think I'm older than Dana.
So Dan, I completely buy much of what was in the presentation, but I'm not hearing any solutions. And being one of the graduate students, is hoping that the leaders in the field would also come up with solutions in addition to showing us what the problems are. What would you say we could do to actually address this issue?
How much time do I have? 0 minutes? I guess one thing is just thinking through very carefully the assumptions underlying the thing, not to rely on on the paper that came immediately before you, but instead really try to ground out your thing, whether it's in some application or really out to the problem of intelligence that we follow. Pat's argument about the high level issues, and more. We should talk about it over a drink afterwards. Maria, please ask your question. I can dodge out.
Okay, well, since everybody's agreeing with you, I felt it's incumbent upon me to stand up and disagree with you. So what I want to say is that, sorry, can I just quickly say this?
No.
This is how we got down here. So there's going to be a 10-minute panel discussion at the end, and you should remember to bring it up.
First, I'd like to comment that the organizers of this conference did a wonderful job, though they were a little cheap. They only took one 6 people. It's six. We'll just have to make do. Okay, so you can see from the title of my talk, the Middle Ages of Planning. I took inspiration from Drew's talk, where he talked about the Dark Ages of planning. Since Kana had such interesting quotes from Drew in the introduction, I thought, well, maybe I could look around and find some more quotes from Drew. So I did find this quote here. Here it says, I found this quote on the web, just a little search. Life in planning during the Dark Ages was very hard. Very few people could read or write. Nobody expected conditions to improve. The only hope for most people during the Dark Ages was their strong belief in planning and the hope that life would be better. So, since Drew pointed out that we've gone through the Dark Ages and then claimed that we've come to the Renaissance, I'm pleased that my name was listed on the page of the Renaissance, but I'm actually afraid that we're actually not in the Renaissance. That in fact we're now in the Middle Ages. We've gone past the Dark Ages, and if we look at the conference today and the kinds of papers that people are publishing, we see lots of papers on planning arguments, planning techniques, planning heuristics, planning. And so on. And then there's also some papers on planning applications and plan execution and mixed initiative planning, and maybe more of the stuff's off in the workshop and stuff. But then you sort of look at, okay, well, who's actually working on these various things? And so what I noticed was that, well, there's a lot of people working on these, planning arguments. And so you look at the proceedings, I did a quick survey, there's roughly 30 papers or so on these topics. And I said, well, what about these other topics? And first you notice that, well, 6 papers, and you also notice that the guys on the right, they're shorter than the ones on the right. And so then I started thinking, well, maybe there's some kind of, chasm between these two groups. Do they actually talk to each other? And so you can see that there's this little cliff here, and then there's this sort of tightrope between the two. And then we have people like Mark Body, who's actually trying to bridge this out here, but he's in danger of falling into the chasm. So I think that's where we are today. So why? The question is, why are we still in the Middle Ages? So what's actually going on here? Well, one thing is, this is what everyone else publishes, right? You see 30 papers in the and you say, well, that's the thing I should write about. There's a lot of interest in that topic. I'm going to write more about that. So that's one issue. Second thing is, well, it's easier to write and evaluate these kinds of papers. People have been working on it for 30 years, right? We have lots of systems to compare to, so if you're doing better. You can measure the performance, all those nice things, and we have made a lot of progress. Don't get me wrong here. I think in general, reviewers are often hard on papers that are outside the mainstream. So if you decide that you want to go and write a paper about some new great application, but you haven't completely understood it yet, then the reviewers can be quite tough on you. And then they question, well, how do you know it's any better than any other systems that came before when there are no systems that came before? Next thing is, well, most people are not trying to determine how their work applies to the real problems. So, if you just go and you keep improving the techniques and they get better and better, well, the question is, and one interesting, point here is that, Mark Body mentioned that in his talk, which was a really nice talk, and I really liked the application, he mentioned to use fast forward. Well, one interesting question would be, well, would it make any difference if he used, fast downward or fast upward, or, whatever, version of the latest planner that won the planning competition, would it make any difference? I would suspect probably they would all do equally well, which is great, but maybe it's not the right one. And then, I think most importantly, we just accept too many. If you look at the poster session yesterday, it's rah, rah, rah. so how do we get to the age of enlightenment? Well, I better quick since I'm running out of time here. This is the answer that Dan wouldn't give. Well, one is to view planning more broadly, right? Forget about this, okay, planning always has to be that we, know the goal and we have the set of operators and we got to figure out how to string them together. I mean, let's look at planning as if planning is viewed in the real world, outside the planning community. Planning is about, actions and all the problems that are associated with it. Encourage papers from the workshops. One interesting thing I noticed is that, well, I think there is a broader cross-section of planning work that's actually going on in the workshops, and it's actually not fully represented in the conference, right? So there is a workshop on mixed industry planning, and a workshop on planning and execution, and a bunch of really interesting topics. And the question is, well, how do you get those papers into the conference next year? I think that's really important. And then, when I just give awards for best application papers, continue the knowledge engineering competition, which is great, and I'm
getting up early, yes, we should do as you say, but there's also something called science, where the whole point is to build on the stuff that's gone before and to make sure that work progresses in a way that builds on that and that develops in a sense incrementally in order to make sure that the science is strong. And sometimes when you do science, you don't know how you're going to apply that science in the long run, and you don't know how you're going to sell that idea straight away to people who are interested in application. So I think that we have a tension in our field, which is that we have this strong sense that we ought to be applying the work that we do, and then we have the other side where there's the strong sense that we ought to be understanding what the core problems are and addressing those core problems and solving those core problems, even if they don't turn out to be the ones that are going to be best solved in the applications. And there is a way in which the two sides are coming together, and one sees that all the time. So I actually think that the balance is, even if it's not perfect, it's not that wrong. You wouldn't expect us to be doing lots and lots of application whilst we still don't really understand some of the core problems that we're having to address in the planning fields. So I would say that the balance is not as bad as you've said it is.
Okay, first I agree with you completely. I'm actually not arguing that next year we should have 30 papers on the right and 6 papers on the left. I think that it's really important that we continue to work on the sort of the core planning algorithms, and I think we've made a lot of progress. But what I would argue is that if you look at when we do have applications, so we don't need lots of applications, we need good applications that really push the technology. But what happens is that we'll see a paper in the proceedings about an application, and everyone will say, well, this is great, nice application, but then no one ever follows up on it to really understand, okay, what's missing here, what was hard? And like in Mark's talk, I'm going to click on Mark today, he mentioned the fact that, well, a good part of the problem had nothing to do with applying the planner to it, right? It was about formulating the right representation and all these other issues that we largely ignore, right? And we should develop a science of things like representation and problem reformulation, all these related issues, so that we haven't just solved the planning algorithm problem, right? But that we take the bigger view and we look at all the related things.
I think the primary reason that people in this room don't do more work on applications is because it is very, very hard. I have, through experience working in several different applications, noticed that the people who are specialists in those applications have very different ideas than we do about what the fundamental problems are, how to go about solving them, and what constitutes a useful solution. And if you want to work in an application area, unless you are willing to adapt those people's point of view, you're not going to do anything that's useful to them. However, having said that it's hard, I wanted to give you also some incentive to do it. And that is that if you actually succeed in doing this, you can double your publication record. Because you can take the exact same work and publish it here and publish it in the conferences for whatever that application domain is. And since it's different people attend, they won't know the difference. And so I wanted to suggest that if we can all do that and do it successfully, then maybe we'll end up with publication records as big as Rao's.
So I think what Dana is implying by his comments there that the audience here is not up to this task.
So Craig, there's going to be another version of this conference next year. And some of us were stupid enough to volunteer to be on the organizing committee for that conference next year. So how would you recommend that we set ourselves up to be burned at the stake during next year's Festivus by acting on your recommendations?
I would love to see people follow up on the application. I mean, there's some great application papers in the conference today, and I would love to see more follow-up on that work, not just by the person who did it, right, but by other people that take a look at those problems and say, oh yeah, there's interesting sub-problems here that I can apply myself to, or we could build tools for doing the knowledge engineering that makes these domains easy, or we look at applying alternative planning techniques and see which ones actually perform better. So there's more just sort of follow-up and pushing on the application so that people understand them better. Thank you.
All right, and now for something completely different. I had the somewhat dubious distinction this year of being on the senior program committee for AAAI. And I say dubious because, as some of you out there know, there were about 8 million papers submitted to AAAI this year, and only about 5 senior program committee members and 25 reviewers. And the net result was something like this. As far as I can tell, the assignment process for papers to reviewers was completely random as well. And so I got papers from quite a number of different disciplines, although to a large extent they fell into these 3 categories. And what I saw was something that disturbed me a bit from looking at the reviewing of the papers in these different categories and seeing all the reviews that came back. So the planning papers fell into a number of different categories. So here's one of them, right? The scientist that comes up with the cool new algorithm, right? And you introduced your standard. And of course, since this has absolutely no validation whatsoever, the result is predictable. Now, the next possibility was that in fact there was some theoretical analysis of some sort, maybe some proofs or some analysis of the algorithm, but of course nobody trusts the proofs, and so we introduced the standard variety reviewer. And now the next possibility is that there is somebody who takes an existing system out there or algorithm and makes a few modifications to it, or a series of modifications, and does extensive experimental results. And of course this is way too incremental, right? And so you introduce the standard reviewer again, and the outcome is predictable. Now, if by some miraculous chance you were able to come up with a really cool algorithm, and you were able to do some analysis on it, and you were able to do to validate this on the entire set of domains that were in the last planning competition, then the reviewer is somewhat more subdued. And the result is that you actually got in. But of course, it's absolutely impossible to do this in 6 pages, and so this is not a realistic scenario. Now, instead, if you look at, for example, some of the CSP and SAT papers, we saw cases in which there was somebody who comes up with an incremental modification here and does some experimental results, and there we go. And then there's the other possibility here, which is to come up with an algorithm and do some analysis of it, and the same outcome. All right, so what's the problem here? We have been living for so long in an environment in which we've been criticized for doing toy things, right? Little teensy problems and not being applicable to real world things, that now we are actually being too hard on ourselves. So that when it comes to reviewing these papers, we're expecting great things of these papers in conferences, and we're not letting through some of the cool ideas and some of the minor enhancements and experimental results. Okay, your turn. Nobody disagrees.
you're suggesting that more people should submit work that's less developed, more possibly cool ideas, and the reviewers should be more welcoming of that kind of work.
Yes, I am.
But how do you know that it isn't just, garbage?
So suppose we look at the last 10 or 15 years, right? There are certainly papers in there that now, in hindsight, we would consider to be garbage, right? That we've learned better. That's okay, right? We don't always do everything right the first time.
I can't really disagree with you. I'm trying to think of something to say there. Come on, somebody.
We've seen this in many subfields, and I mean I agree. And whenever I run a conference, I do what I can to try and change that. And maybe I change it for a year, and then the next year it backslides. It's very hard to have some permanent solution. Do you have one? What do we do?
This.
Yeah. I mean, I think we need some kind of procedural change in how the review process works. So for example, when I ran Machine Learning Conference, I introduced conditional acceptances, okay? And that was a mechanism by which, so if you have as your default that you're going to reject a paper, then people look for, one reviewer can blackball it. But if you have a conditional acceptance policy where it's, if a paper is close but not quite there, it'd be pretty easy for them to fix the problem, then you give them a few weeks to do that, and then you'll get it one more time, and if it's okay, you let it in. That's a procedural mechanism that could help. Now, I'm not saying that's the only one, but we need things like that. I think structural changes to the reviewing process if you want to have a long-term effect.
Steve Mahaney from NSF refers to this phenomenon as circling the wagons and shooting inward. In terms of reviewing each other's grants, each other's papers, and in trying to make our conferences too exclusive. And while I have the mic, I want to address something about applications. And that is that they're very bad to work on and very good. If you're trying to teach graduate students and have graduate students do most of your programming, and you're working on applications, they end up writing tools. And there's a good question of whether that's an appropriate research education, writing tools for specific applications. On the other hand, when you do the application, as I've been discovering, you discover that there are all sorts of things we should be working on and that we haven't thought about yet. And it's a really wonderful process to discover how much you don't know. And it's very humbling. And I also want to add that although Dana is older and less reasonable than the speakers, he's also cuter.
So I didn't actually put applications up here, but there's a similar phenomenon that happened with application papers, which is the question is always raised as to, can we in fact generalize this to anything beyond the specific application? Right, and the result is predictable.
Wow, tough act to follow. But, so I'm going to disagree. And I'm going to disagree. No, I'm going to disagree with Dave's commentary on two counts. One, I actually would criticize the reviewers at CSP and SAT who bought into the incremental results. And I think that those reviewers should have been more aggressive. And I also think that I disagree with the assessment about what I saw, albeit at a much lower level in the AAA reviewing process. I saw numerous CSP, SAT, and constrained programming papers that were too incremental, too theoretical, too divorced from AI reality, ultimately get rejected from the conference. So what's your response to the CSP, SAT reviewers should be as aggressive as we are?
I think it's possible to go too far in the other direction here, right, certainly. But yeah, so I saw some of those as well. But I also saw a lot of cases in which there were SAT and CSP papers which did something that I considered to be sufficiently novel. The reviewers thought it was interesting. It was easy enough for them to compress it into 6 pages, but it didn't cover the whole gamut from end to end like we seem to be requiring of ourselves right now.
Hi. The people before. It's okay. I was pushed by Rao to do this thing this morning, so you know that being a not native speaker for me is very difficult to be entertaining. Why Rao pushed me? Because we have been discussing in this last couple of days about some issue that were bothering me. I was reasoning in my mind. Maybe not all of you knows that, for example, I was not particularly in favor ages ago about creating this unique conference in a year. So, but once we took the decision, I'm now extremely worried in creating a community behind this conference. So there is a phenomenon that I would like all of you to think a little bit. Sorry, I am not entertaining. It's the risk is that I'm a little bit more political. This is for an ancient Italian tradition, so but I cannot make it that much different. This is the only slide. Think about this. and now remind what Daniel was saying. Essentially, we are increasingly becoming very good, very focalized group of people, which is the risk. The risk is that after a while, there are 6 or maximum 10 laboratories that are very good. The distance between the rest of the world will be so much that essentially the 10 laboratories, in the best case, 5 laboratories in the world will be an island that is self-referential. So I will try to have you reason about this and eventually come up with some solution in the immediate future, not necessarily today. We have been reasoning among the council people for a little bit about this. One possibility, for example, is to enlarge a little bit. So, you know, the conference is mostly the technical program. The problem is also that any people that comes here would like to have his role, his moment for saying something, doing something, represent himself to the others. And this somehow is controversial because, you know, because the technical program is the focusing point. You can say, okay, I enlarge the number of paper accepted, that's it. But this is not, because this is against us, because somehow we decrease the quality. That is right now one of the factors that make us successful, because everybody is observing us. Well, we'll come up in the next times with some experiments. For example, maybe accepting some poster, maybe say experimenting the conditional acceptance that I know his name very well, but cannot remind me. Sorry, very sorry. It was mentioned before. But there is for sure one way that for all of us, for coping with this problem. For example, enlarging the number of submitted papers. If we have 200 papers, of course, the program chair should say, oh, Jesus, I cannot accept 1 out of 10. This is too tough. And they come up with some solution. In any case, here the call is for saying, listen, this is not the council conference. This is all of us conference. If we all enjoy being here, this conference will be long-lasting. But there is this problem of the base. Please keep submitting submitting paper to the conference. Don't be scared about being rejected, because this is the part of the play, but it's responsibility of all of us for somehow not becoming self-referential. So it's responsibility of the base for submitting papers, is responsibility of the program committee non-killing people but explaining reason for that. and for encouraging, for example, the continuation of good ideas. Somehow, if we are able to create some circularity in the community, we'll be able to maintain the quality, but not become a downtown surrounded by a desert. It's very complicated.
It sounds like it's a simple solution. We should all just co-author papers with Ralph.
Yeah, that's right. I was one of the guys pointing out this Ralph submerging the conference. So I gave it that this eventually could be a solution.
My original area of research was programming languages, and I found what you were worried about happened in that area, where it was a very rich, active field of research, but it became completely separate from anybody outside of the research area. So that at some point, if you look around, there were all these interesting papers at the Programming Languages Conference, and then there were all these programming languages being implemented by talented people, and they're completely separate groups. And so I guess it's only verifying that such a thing can happen without providing a lot of solutions. But it's very important that the people who are doing it outside of the academic conferences are accounted for, are interacted with by the people doing it inside the conferences.
Yeah, I agree with you. And consider that essentially, if there is no communication between downtown and the countryside, the desert is inevitably grown up and suffocate the downtown.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I completely agree with you, and one thing we're going to try to do in ICAPS 2007 is to somehow manage to increase we're going to try to increase the number of papers submitted while not completely blowing up the acceptance rate so as to have still more papers. Well, okay, we're going to try to have more papers as parallel track by trying to encourage more papers to be submitted and trying to keep a decent acceptance rate. And I also wanted to comment that when we submitted the proposal to organize ICAPS 07, one of the comments or the questions of the committee was, okay, you've got all these parallel tracks, and how many papers do you plan to accept? What's going to be the acceptance rate? They seem to be really, really worried about, making ICAPS one of these 40% acceptance rate conference. Yeah. Say that.
Yes, there is a trade-off here, and we are right, and we should find some compromise. Of course, we shouldn't harm too much the quality. This is Ralph.
So, since apparently I created part of the problem, I can provide a solution. For proper consideration, I can provide a large denominator. We'll write a lot of papers and submit it as long as you accept 10% of mine, and you guys can have. That's what
It's okay. Thanks a lot.
I sure hope this works. Okay, so this is my chance to bat the moon, as I say it. Is this going to work, or do I need a mic?
It's a mic. You can take that, yes.
Okay. So I found it really interesting that when I arrived here, I get this. The community is really obsessed with briefcases. And the ever popular blocks. It's a nice wobbly stack. Hopefully it'll fall over in the course of the talk. So my pet peeve, my bay at the moon, is this. Ooh, I did it already. For those of you who don't know the reference, this is Rodney Dangerfield, American comedian, who says things like, I get no respect. I told my psychiatrist that everybody hates me, and he said, no, you're wrong, everybody hasn't met you yet. So product research is the same sort of problem. Everybody thinks it's cool and interesting and goes, yeah, that's useful. But when it comes time to get the paper accepted by the reviewers into the proceedings, but the problem is that what people really care about is what changes their lives. So I've got a joke that goes along that. So there's this planning and scheduling researcher who's walking to work one day. She sees a frog at the side of the path. And the frog calls up to her, hi, pick me up. I'm an enchanted prince. Just kiss me and I'll turn into a handsome prince. So she picks him up, puts him in her pocket, and keeps walking. So the frog says, no, no, no. I'll stay with you for a week. I'll be your boyfriend. I'll give you money. Pick me up and kiss me. So she looks at him and she says, look, I'm a planning and scheduling researcher. I don't have time to hang out with a handsome prince, and I don't care about money. But a talking frog is cool. So we have all these great applications. But the thing is, if you take a look at our current proceedings, and I even looked at the last proceedings, I could find only 3 papers on these. So even though it's cool work, it's great work, it is not making it into the proceedings. Interestingly, though, in the current proceedings, I could find 5 papers that still do blocks world. So this is a real quick. There are other communities that have dealt with this. Look at robotics. They've actually turned this into a plus instead of a minus. Applications are hard to do, but they've gotten a tremendous amount of press out of RoboCop, out of Search and Rescue, and of course, the ever-popular Roomba, which passed 1 million in sales last fall. So you can take robotics as an example of a field that has dealt with applications and turned it into an asset. All right, I have another joke on this. Sometimes you aren't told what you want to hear. We've all been traveling. So your flight is canceled. Everybody gets in line at the ticket counter, the gate agent, to try to rebook the flight. One man walks up to the front, bangs on the table, and says, you got to take me next. And the person says, no, all these people are in line, sir. I can't take you next. And he says, do you know who I am? And she says, just a minute, sir. And she takes the mic and she says, excuse me, I have a man here who doesn't know who he is. So, this is the sometimes you aren't told what you want to hear. So the reviewers, here are my concrete suggestions on what to do. Don't expect experimental control. You're not going to get lots of repetitions. You're not going to get 10 people who have solved this problem before. There's no previous example on it. You can't get it. Think differently about what relevance means in terms of the review criteria. Think about the long-term goals of the field and what we really learn from these things when you're taking a look at applied papers. To the authors, because you're not exempt either. Do a better job of writing the papers. Explain why anybody should care about the application. Explain what you learned with it. Make a guess of why you did what you did and why it worked the way it did. Help us out here. An example along those lines is when I was a grad student finishing up and I worked on a forest firefighting system. I went and gave a talk, and Matt Ginsberg jumps up after the talk. And if you know Matt, he says, why should I care about forest firefighting? And my response was, I don't care if you do care about forest firefighting, Matt. But the point is that you can learn an awful lot about the methods that we're using by applying them someplace. So that's what I want you all to take from this. And my final word on this is, if you talk to a child about, and this is my daughter, how blocks should be used, and I have to agree with her, that's how she says blocks should be used. So if you can build a planner that can build something that creative, I'm with you on blocks. Otherwise,
You left out a few things on authors. In the workshop, John Christina gave a great list of things that didn't work so well on MapGen. And I would say that you should say authors should put those in, and reviewers shouldn't reject the paper because they're in, because they provide all sorts of grist for the researchers to see what needs to be fixed.
Excellent idea.
You had a reference to RoboCop, and I think one interesting thing that they have is that after every year they have the competition, they all share the same code in a pool, and then next year everybody looks at that code and improves it in a different way, and they improve. So what I've seen in planning competitions is that a line of research is happening and they improve it, keep improving it, but nobody else makes an improvement. improvements to it, and I think we should adopt their policy.
Yeah, so that's like the second point there. Make available data when you can do it. Make available code when you can do it. I know you can't always do it. I know I've got a problem I've worked on. I'm not allowed to give out the problem, and it pains me. But as often as you can, early and often.
If you're competing in a planning competition, you might as well give the code.
Absolutely. It almost should be required.
On that subject of making code and problems available, my personal view is that people may be doing some very, very interesting work in application, but if they can't make the problem available so other people can't try to reconstruct what they did and try to understand for themselves what worked, and the level of abstraction at which the paper is written is so high that one can only get a nice warm feeling that, wow, planning is being used, isn't that great? Then actually that paper is of no use to us. And it's great that people are doing that work because I'm sure it's very fulfilling, but it's of no use to the community. So I am totally with you that if one can describe what worked, why, what the features of the problem were, and allow others to see how to reconstruct that work and, and learn from it in a scientific way, I don't think anybody in this room would disagree that that would be an incredibly useful contribution. But the abstract stuff is not really helping us much.
Okay, so my response to that is the word at the bottom is the website. I mean, to some extent, 6, 8, or 10 pages is not enough to do an applied paper, but we're forgetting the fact that you can make things available in other venues. You don't have to cram everything into the proceedings. So my response would be take some of it and put it on the website, refer to the website in your paper.
I think that in order to provide some things that satisfy what Maria was talking about, and also to provide a real application that just about everybody in this room would be able to work on, the next IPC organizers should draft Mark Body to do a cybersecurity competition. And the person whose computer is left standing at the end would win.
This is related to Martin's comment, and more importantly, the fact that application has come up twice and thrice. One other thing that the robotics community is doing is that they not only have a plan of having robots play soccer by 2050, but they have incremental plans at each year. For example, they've introduced, they for the first time introduced this whole plan that in which you have a human-sized robot being able to just kick the ball, even though it's supported by stands and stuff. And I think application development really helps if there is a long plan with short time, midpoint goals which people as a community as a whole tries to address.
Yeah. So thanks to Paul Cohen for the slide. He's got the goal, but he also said there were simple success criteria, and there's a lot of scientific progress that's indicated by the RoboCup committee, and they've got a technical committee that thinks very long and very hard about that. That's absolutely right.
It appears to me that it looks like from a few of the folks that have spoken that you have this one side of the house that's like the theorists, and then the other side that are the real world application folks. And I think the parties every night are really good for getting those people together, but is there a way to get those folks together during the rest of the year so that if somebody came up with an idea, like I think of myself as more on the application side, and I'm new to the theorist part, but I'd really like to find a theorist that's interested in some of the application issues that I'd like to work on. So that's all.
Okay, so I'll have an airline joke. That man is looking for a theorist.